Welcome to Mystara, both console cowboys and proud members of the PC Master Race, as this week's video, as determined by you, is Video Games of Mystara. As far as D&D video games go, Forgotten Realms has the lion's share, that's undeniable. But after the really steep drop-off to second place, Mystara sits tied with Dragonlance in second place with 8 games each. To compare, Eberron, Darksun, and Ravenloft have 3, Greyhawk appears twice, and Planescape, Spelljammer, and Birthright only get a single game each. To compare that, Forgotten Realms has about 5 times all of the rest combined. And while not all the Mystara games were well received, at least ours didn't try to delete Windows off your computer. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's play Thermonuclear War. I'm taking these games in chronological order, counting Stronghold as a Mystara game because it's generally considered one even though it doesn't have an actual setting, but it is very loosely a BECMI game, and for a lot of reviewers that makes it Mystara. The Chronicles of Mystara also count, even though it's technically a compilation. There were multiple changes made to make it different enough to count. But that's enough qualifying. It's time to start playing. First up comes from a very unlikely source, the TurboGrafx. Order the Griffin was set firmly in Karamikos as your pre-generated party is trying to find the source of all the monsters threatening the lands surrounding the haunted Korizeski Keep. The game largely used the BECMI rules, but was limited by the TurboGrafx engine. The playstyle is very similar to the classic Gold Box games, alternating between top-down for combat and first-person when exploring the dungeon. There's no character generation. You pick between the 7 classes. Each one gives you 3 optional characters. Pick 4 characters and it's time to play. It's one of the first console D&D games, but it hasn't aged well compared to games like Curse of the Azure Bonds. The lack of customization hurt the game, considering this is years after the Gold Box games. The music is considered an old shame by Frank Kaplacki, who later went on to score some of the best video games from Westwood and other game companies. Released in the same year for the Sega Genesis was Warriors of the Eternal Sun, the only Hollow World video game ever made. Because it was released for the Genesis compared to the TurboGrafx, Warriors was better received, though it has aged poorly again because of the Gold Box games. It keeps a similar style with top-down combat above ground like Azure Bonds, and first-person exploration and dungeon combat like Eye of the Beholder. 4 characters to a party, but you can actually create your characters rather than just select them from pre-made characters. The plot is simple. You are transported to the Hollow World, along with the castle you were defending. You have to find out how to get back to the surface. As far as Hollow World elements goes, it doesn't disappoint. You've got Azcan, Blacklore Elves, Shotenalfen, who actually look like Shotenalfen instead of just Drow, and even get to watch an epic battle for its time between the immortal Ka and a Burrower. Gameplay, it has all the same problems Eye of the Beholder was criticized for. In short, do you like kiting? Because that's the name of the game. It does do a good job with the technology of its day. It would be nice to actually see the red sun and the floating continents, but it's a Sega Genesis, and the graphics just weren't there yet. The first computer game featuring Mystara was actually a strategy game called Fantasy Empires, released in 1993. It had an impressive map of the known world as you played as various warlords that are trying to conquer the world. You recruit troops based on the classic character types, hire heroes, and find magic items. The available troops depend on where you've established your empire. If you want elves, you have to control Alfheim, and shadow elves live in the Broken Lands. There's no difference between the human nations, which is sad, but it's understandable. This isn't Civilization. Combat is fairly simple, with the larger army typically winning. The one game-breaking issue was the high-level characters could destroy entire armies in strategic battles, as they will scythe through grunts without damage. Stronghold came out in 1993 and is the least Mystaran game on this list. It's only Mystara because it uses the BECMI rules, and it was the first domain management game that fits in well with the Mystara theme. But it is also one of the D&D and name-only games, as you can build structures on a randomly generated map, recruit, train, and order your population. You have to manage food, income, and fight the occasional monster. Combat is simply summoning all your free characters to a location with monsters and letting them fight it out. You don't actually have much in the way of tactics, it's just mob rule. It's got D&D monsters, it's got BECMI classes, but other than that, it's barely a D&D game. Then we get to the Capcom games, the games that many people learned about Mystara from. First up was the arcade game Tower of Doom. I'm not going to lie, I spent almost as much money on this game as I spent on modules. The game takes place in Darrakan, with each player playing one of the 4 classes. There's a dwarf, an elf, a fighter, and a cleric, but it leaves out the magic user, halfling, and thief. As it's a beat-em-up, the plot is simple. Walk from point A to point B and kill everything in between. What made it different from other Capcom beat-em-ups was the fact that you had equipments and spells. You could buy thrown weapons or flaming oil for ranged attacks, or get limited-use rings of spell storing to give your characters more options than the normal games of that style. It made Capcom a lot of money. The designer of the game, Alex Jimenez, apparently designed an adventure module based on the video game, so if you see him at a convention, ask him to run it for you. After Tower of Doom came Shadow over Mystara, which for more than a few arcade aficionados is considered the greatest beat-em-up ever designed. It added the Thief and the Magic User to the available characters. The Halfling didn't make it, sadly. Everything about the game is upgraded. It introduces Glantry, the Broken Lands, and the world below to the gameplay. There are multiple arcing paths. That means the game can be played multiple times with a different result each time. There's Easter eggs galore. It rewards multiplayer with achievements only possible with the right combination of characters, like you can earn a Holy Avenger. It does only resemble parts of the known world in name only. Sin goes from a Shadow Dragon to a Red Dragon, for example. Glantry suddenly gets an Alphatian-style Air Force. The gameplay is smooth, the enemies are varied, and there's so many secrets you have to play through numerous times to find them all. Capcom later re-released their games as the Dungeons & Dragons collection, but that was only in Japan. There were numerous bug fixes, but more importantly, the graphics were updated greatly to the modern consoles. IGN placed the game in their top 10 co-op games. In 2013, Chronicles of Mystara was released, which was the American version of the Dungeons & Dragons collection, but it added new content in addition to the upgraded graphics. New exclusive items could be gained by reaching certain parts of the game. The House Rules section meant you can raise or lower the difficulty as you see fit. Capcom took an already excellent game and somehow made it better. It's got all the role-playing potential of Double Dragon, but as far as the D&D aspect is concerned, it was genre-defining. If you want to get any of these games, you're going to have to be looking at an emulator for most of them. They're pure abandonware for the most part. You're not going to go out and buy an old TurboGrafx just for a single game. Since the quality of the earlier stuff was a bit dubious compared to the gold box versions that predated them, that's not a bad thing. A simple Google search will bring them up easily enough. If you have a console and want to beat people up, Chronicles will run you about $15, and that's well worth it. So, new week, new topic. Second place this week was pretty much a four-way tie, and joining that logjam, we've got the subject of women in Mystara, talking about how the various cultures treat women and how far women can ascend in the various nations. But until next week, remember you were recruited by Starleague to defend the frontier against Zor and the Kodan Armada.